All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to Eric Reviews' YouTube channel. And today's video, we're going to be again continuing on our positive negatives of episode 5. And I want to talk about specifically a lot of the things I liked, because some of the complaints that I've had in earlier episodes are kind of coming a little bit full circle. Some things I've started to kind of like a little bit. And so I want to start off episode 5 with talking about the positives, because I think in the longer reviews, check those out if you haven't. They go really in depth about every single scene. We tend to focus a lot on some of the more negative aspects, or even looking at how the book changed certain things. So I like to start with the positives in these videos, because I do think the show is overall good, but for room for improvement. So right away, I want to say again, because this has been a continued theme through all of the episodes, I think the horror aspects, when they really lean into it, the visuals have been pretty good on this show when it comes to like the set design, right? How things are looking when it comes to CGI. We'll talk about a little bit of a negative when it comes to that part of it, but I think everything so far has looked pretty good. I was really a big fan of when Annabeth and Percy go in the Thrill of Love ride, and we see like Hephaestus's story on the wall. It's lit really well. All that's really done extremely well. And the amusement park itself gives off a very ominous feel. It's really similar to the way the book counterpart felt like. It's not the same in the way it looks, because the whole main central plot at the whole amusement park goes much differently. But for what the budget, I think, for the show is, given that we're missing a lot of stuff from the book, when it comes to a lot of the action set pieces are a lot different in the book. They're scaled down quite a lot in the show. So I think, given what they had the budget to do, I think they did a pretty good job in this episode when it comes to that. I thought the music placement, when they decided to do like higher, heroic music, or whether it was drama-filled music, whether it was, funny timing, right? What is love basically popping up during the Thrill of Love ride, perfect timing. Whether that's the horror music when they're getting to the amusement park, all of it's done really, really well. When it comes to the music side of the episode, it did everything its music is supposed to do, enhance the feelings that you're supposed to be feeling during a scene. All of that worked really well in this episode. Other things I really liked that I want to talk about in the forefront of this video, Annabeth. I'm still don't really buy that this is like the Annabeth from the book. I just think I view the character of Annabeth much differently than the writers of the show and what they're kind of going for on this in this show. So to me, I kind of understand that. So I'm trying to judge the show Annabeth about what they're doing with the character. And I liked this episode for Annabeth, right? There was a lot of interesting parts of her character that we had to juggle with. And one of my favorite aspects of this episode is how Percy and Annabeth kind of switch a lot of their ideologies throughout this episode. And they come back at the end and kind of agree on everything. But to begin this, right, if we go off of the last episode, what were the consequences of the last episode? You might be thinking, well, Percy lived, so more or less the consequences are fine. There aren't really any consequences. But that would be wrong, because the ideologies switch completely. Percy goes from a character that had no faith in his father, he didn't care about his father, and now he's like, whoa, my father saved me, he's going to help us on this quest, I just got to get to Santa Monica. And on the other side of that, you've got Annabeth, who's just like, wait a minute, my mother didn't help me and almost got me or Percy or all of us killed because she let these monsters into the arch. So you have this switch, right, where Annabeth has to now critically think about the gods, and specifically her mother, and Percy's on the other side of that, where he's growing to care a bit more about his father, Poseidon. So I like that dynamic because it creates a lot of interesting discussion going forward. I like that Annabeth and Percy, starting the episode, are completely different when it comes to fate and prophecy. When we see Annabeth seeing the fates, in her mind, this instantly means that one of them is going to die. There is no if, and, or buts. They're going to die. One of them is going to die shortly. And that's in the back of Annabeth's mind. She believes that that's unavoidable. This was the fates doing that. Well, Percy's on the other side of that, right? Where Percy says, I don't believe in that. I'm going to do what I can do, right? My choices matter, right? He takes like the opposite Anakin approach from Revenge of the Sith. I like that, because then by the end of towards the end of the episode, when it gets to this chair that they have to sit on to get Ares' shield, there's a flip in that, right? Where Percy's basically like, I guess I was wrong, right? that prophecy does happen, that I am meant to sit in this chair and I'm going to more or less die. Where Annabeth's on the other side of that. How can we avoid this, right? There has to be some way that we can avoid that happening. Her choices matter. I love that because the actors, the writers do a really good job in this episode of giving those two characters specifically a lot of things to think about. And that's not only to think about one of my major things I really enjoy throughout the show that they've done more than I think the books really have, is focusing in on the gods themselves, how they war with each other. They start wars all of the time. Do they even care that they're starting wars, that people die because of their actions? I love that because this family is so messed up. I love that they're playing more on it, because when we get later in this season, when we get to future seasons, that's a very pivotal point. How the gods treat not only people, humans, their children, but also their brothers and all that, or sisters, whatever. All that's really vital for this story, and it's very key to understand. I really like that they've kind of honed in on that. So another thing I really enjoyed, not only what they're giving Annabeth to do, right? They're making her character more complex and doing things with the character. But I really enjoyed the performance from the actress on Annabeth, giving her more emotion, because so far, I mean, throughout the first 3 to 4 episodes, very stagnant, right? She hasn't had much to do. They haven't really tested her emotional range. This episode, they switched it up really good, and you really feel that emotional weight when Percy sacrifices himself for the second time for Annabeth, and we see the weight that that has, how their relationship has grown much closer because of Percy saving Annabeth's life. Again, we see Annabeth hugging Percy at the beginning of the episode. I now really do buy a bit of that relationship, even though I have a little bit of problems of how we got there. I now that we're at this point, I'm starting to actually believe them as a friendship at this point. So all of that is really, really good. I really enjoy the way that this actress was able to encompass the character and work through all these emotions and proving why she was cast for this role. I enjoyed that in this episode. Percy, again, the actor that does Percy, always does a very good job. This was no different. He did a great job as well. I liked the castings of Ares and Hephaestus. They both felt like the character to me. So again, I think another great casting. I think they've done a really good job so far with casting for the most part. So I just wanted to throw that was good. I think, you know, Ares, the presence of who that character was, what they ended up doing with Hephaestus was really good. And yeah, I think that's a lot of the positive. Some of the things I want to say are good about the show. And so let's get into more of the negative or questionable things that I'm questioning with this episode and going forward. And a lot of my questions and concerns basically come from the Grover plot. Because the Grover plot to me is exactly what is wrong with Grover's character in the show. I may be different in the way I interpret the character of Grover, but I talked about this on my other channel and stream today. And one of the things that I really took away from this is I think Grover in the book is more like a character like if you've read Lord of the Rings or watched Lord of the Rings, the movies, or you're a Song of Ice and Fire and you know Samwell Tarly. That's kind of where Grover is. He's a character with kind of lower confidence at this time. He's had a couple of failures in the past that have really held him down. He's not someone that like is going to be very confident, really good about like, say for instance, like public speaking, for instance. Like that's kind of the vibe I get from the character, right? He's someone that's still finding himself. And that's not apparent in the show at all, right? Like we go into this episode and Grover is manipulating Ares. He is someone that is fully confident with Ares. And I'm just sitting here and it's like, this is not the Grover from the book, right? Like this isn't what Grover would be doing in the situation at all. And so it really bugs me when we have stuff like this that is not from the books at all. Like this doesn't happen. Grover and Ares are not together. And so they do this stuff because for plot reasons or this or that. And this is why it's also questionable. It's partly negative because of past episodes, but it's also questionable because I don't know where they're going with the plot that they brought up with who stole the Master Bolt and Grover kind of doing this manipulation on Ares. This is all completely made up from the book. It's not in the book. And so what I dislike is that we can spend time on this stuff that I don't really think is that important to the story right now, but we can't do the rest of Grover's actual storyline, the plot line that is important to his character, him becoming a searcher, his stuff with the Elder Council. I don't actually remember their official term, but with the satyrs of trying to get a searcher's license and all of that, and his trials and tribulations with that. We don't spend time with the character of Grover gaining more confidence, being more confident. He's already that, right? We've skipped a step. And so I really hate that, because also the other part of it is like Grover through 5 episodes feels like the only reason he is here is to bring Annabeth and Percy together. That's it. He is of no other use, right? The only other thing you can think of is like, okay, when they fight Medusa, he has this weird flying off scene, and then he just randomly knocks into Medusa, not even because of his own like ability. It's random, right? At this point of the story, Grover feels almost useless. Like he's not even a character, which is crazy given that in the book, when this stuff ends up happening, Grover is the one that saves Percy's and Annabeth's life in this chapter in the book. Goes down completely different, and I'll talk about that, but I just feel like the character of Grover, I'm constantly questioning why they're doing certain things with his character. Whereas like Annabeth, I've kind of come around with it more. I just didn't like the setup of the character at all. And I understand why that setup failed because of some other things, which we're going to talk about in this. But I think the character of Grover is just lacking to me. And so we can't really talk about the Master Bolt reveal thing that Grover has, which is almost just feels like a cheap cliffhanger, but we don't know where that's going yet. It's not a book thing at all. So I'm not going to judge it yet, right? I'm going to leave that as a, little thing on the questionable stuff, and we'll get back to it in episode 6, 7, and 8. But Grover, I was not a fan of really in this episode at all. It was definitely the low point of the episode. I think me and my friend Logan that review the show, this was the part of it that was like, not good. So when we get to Percy and Annabeth, and when it comes to anything that was really negative on this side of it, and it's nothing to do with, I guess, the execution. Like, I do have, like, some issues, but the problem for me that I'm really starting to see in episode 5 is this series, or this show, is really struggling with only having 8 episodes. Because they're missing, like, key things to the book that we talked about in every single one of these episodes. But also the other issue is, not only is it only 8 episodes, it's only 30 minutes. That's not a long time, right? These are only ranging from about 30 to 34 minutes an episode. So you have that, but you also look at, like, they obviously don't have the budget that they needed to really fully bring the book to life. And it becomes crystal clear when you see as every single episode, the action set pieces are brought down quite a bit. And so let me just give you an example. The way the show did the whole Ares shield stuff is they ride a boat, they get to this chair, and that's where the shield is. And that's it. They just got to sit on the chair, and that gets in the shield. That is not at all how it happens in the book. The book, it's more of a bigger event, right? So in the book, it's just the shield, it's on the boat that they're supposed to go on. And as soon as they grab it, all of these Cupid statues, they start basically making a net. It's basically to trap them. It actually ties in really well with the mythology of Ares and Aphrodite being caught sleeping together and made a mockery of by Hephaestus. And so it's a really nice tie into that. But it's a really big thing because you have this net coming in, and then you have little spiders, like robot spiders that come from the ground. And so it's a big old thing. And then you also see something like what we kind of saw in the show as well, where Percy uses his power to manipulate the water. Something else that also happens in the book, but it's just much more of a grand scale. And then you end up having, like, Grover the whole time trying to keep the net open. And then Grover ends up saving the day because they're basically having to do some parkour, and they're going to fall to their death, and Grover slows it down. A lot more happened there. A lot more you'd have to do CGI for. A lot more stunt work you'd have to do. There's just more involved with the book version of those events. And that's consistently what's happened pretty much consistently throughout the show, where they've really toned down a lot of the action set pieces. And I think that has to be because of the budget. Like, I'm sitting here and I'm going, why are these episodes so short? Why is there only 8 episodes? And I think one of the biggest things holding back this series and this show specifically is that exact point, right? Because now the writers have to come up with their own way of doing this event still that happens in the book, but do it in a way that's cost effective, and is not that long. So we get to this point where it's a chair. Now, the only issue I kind of have with the way it's executed here is that it doesn't really tie into like Aphrodite and Ares, right? Like that's kind of what the tie-in here is. Like Ares loses his shield because he's on a date with Aphrodite, and Hephaestus scares them somehow, and it's because of the net and the spiders, whatever. So in this scenario, it doesn't tie into that at all. It ties into Hera more or less, because this is kind of what was done in the mythology with this chair. So it ties into Hera, so it still has some of the same effect, where it's like the gods just are very screwed up. And it's a nice parallel to Hephaestus's like background. So it's like, it's not a bad thing, but it's just a downgrade from what we could have gotten, is kind of how I look at it. And that's where I've looked at a lot of the show, where it's like, I don't mind what they did, I just think it could have been so much better, right? Like the book changes that they're making, I know why they're doing them in a lot of cases. And it's very difficult to see because it's so much different, and it could be so much better if they just did it this way. But yeah, we've talked about kind of why that is, though. Again, I hope next season, right? I hope this series has had enough success. I don't know like what it's getting view-wise or critically. I've looked up, it's been usually about what I've judged it as, about a 7 to 8. I hope that's enough to give it a second season, to get more budget behind this show, to give it more episodes, right? Because I think 8 episodes with only about 30 minutes, it's not enough to me to tell the full story and everything that you really want to do if you're going to adapt this book. And so, yeah, I mean, just if you just want to put it this way, think about Lord of the Rings, right? The movie, the extended edition, is like 4 hours long. And they cut stuff out. Like they had to cut stuff out because the book was just, it was very detailed. It was very big. And so when you put that into this and you're going, yeah, I mean, 30 minutes is, it's about 4 hours worth of content. So it's like, I don't know. To me personally, I think that's the biggest thing holding it back. But again, questionable stuff, right? There's some other stuff that I can't really judge yet because we don't know where they're going with them. But I am excited for the next 3 episodes. The next 3 episodes should all be good, right? Going to the underworld, and the Lotus Hotel, very important and significant to this story. Even not even just impacting this book, but books to come. So really excited for the rest of the series, and I hope it kind of finishes with a bang.